like to introduce Scott English as our presenter today, and he's going to talk about some of his experiences. It started many years ago. He first started on this. A lot of interesting things you were just talking about happened about 50 years ago.
I've got some good stories.
Stories about that, and there's a lot of things going on then. We had just banned DDT here, and told me Mexico at the same time. And I forget any environmentalists in the room that were in Oregon about that time. You had the Land Conservation and Development Commission was formed to help protect our wildlands from rampant, indiscriminate urban growth that would take, a lot of our farmland and our forests and other reserves out of being reserves anymore. So that happened about 50 years ago, along with some interesting stories that our speaker will tell you about. So without any further ado, Scott English.
Okay. I'm going to start it off, before we get into the video, I'd just like to just kind of tell a few stories, a little more background information. In 1973, 1974, I was a student at the Oregon Institute of Marine Biology in Charleston, and I luckily basically was asked if I could participate in a National Science Foundation survey of Great Blue Heron Colonies on the Oregon coast. And actually at the time, I was not a declared major, so I was hired because I knew something about mapping, courtesy of the Air Force, where I worked in the civil engineering squadron. So at any rate, so I signed up for this project, and we surveyed all these rookeries and mapped them from Astoria all the way down to Gold Beach. And that was in 1973-74. And as part of that, I was more interested in the birds than I was in the mapping. So after the mapping was done and the study was basically published, I decided I wanted to learn more about herons and ornithology in general. So I put together a study proposal to map and describe all the heron colonies along the Willamette River from Portland to Eugene. And went about that with, I have to thank the Salem Audubon because I was looking for funding earlier on, and this is about 1975, to kick this project off. And at the time I was just finishing up taking ornithology classes and so forth at Oregon State. And I went to one of the profs and I said, I'm looking for funding to do this heron study. And he said, kid, I'm sorry, but we don't fund non-game projects. Translation, if you can't eat it, we're not going to fund it. Thank goodness things have changed. So anyway, I put together this study, and it was by myself with the exception of several volunteer pilots. The project involved flying in a light plane from Eugene up to Portland and back, and identified during the winter these colonies that you could see clearly from the air. We were flying probably at maybe 70, 80 miles an hour in relatively small aircraft, and maybe 500 feet off the ground. And you could pick out these colonies just as plain as day. And so anyway, we started flying, and I was taking pictures. I was trying to figure out how am I going to locate these colonies on the ground. We had no GPS. So I just took a bunch of photographs with a Pentax camera, and then I was working with the Greenway Commission at the time that was recently formed about then. And they let me use their aerial photographs. So I correlated my photographs with the air photographs. I was able to locate the colonies on the ground and then developed a way to visit them, which was by boat and by slogging through the reed canary grass and all kinds of stuff to get to these colonies. And I wound up climbing several trees and building platforms so I could sit in the middle of these colonies and gather nesting data. As you can imagine what the response was from the herons. It was highly disturbing. And the herons have typically a fear response. So if you're disturbing a colony, they will regurgitate out of one end and stuff comes out of the other end. And And I wound up wearing a hard hat because they would be dropping half-pound, half-digested fish on me. Anyway, I had a great time. I did this pretty much by myself. Went to get some funding, and at the time there was a guy named Charlie Bruce. Charlie was the first non-game biologist that Department of Fish and Wildlife hired. And Charlie was able to finagle some stipend funding for me, and he rounded up a boat and a motor and a camera and some gear for me. And I went to a local, basically he was a falconer named Dan Fensky. I don't know if any of you guys know Dan Fensky. He's a retired lineman. Anyway, Dan lent me his climbing spurs and taught me how to climb trees, so I was able to build that project, the nesting platform observation. Anyway, so Charlie, unbeknownst to me, I didn't have any, I didn't know how to run a boat. Ultimately, by myself, I flipped the boat, lost the motor, lost the camera, saved my life. It was all good. But it's amazing what you could do when you're 30 years old by yourself. I mean, I look back at it and thought, I did all that in basically one huge, from spring to summer. And then I got the results published in the National Audubon Society research bulletin number 7 called Wading Birds. And gave this presentation in Charleston, South Carolina in 1978. And after the presentation, this professor walked up to me from Oregon State and he said, Scott, he said, I'm really sorry that we didn't have enough funding to give to you. He said, you have a really worthwhile project. So I felt somewhat vindicated. Yeah, and also thanking the Salem Audubon for that. It's an honor to be here and talk about this some more. So that's basically 1975. Okay, so now almost 50 years passes, and 2023 in November, I believe it was, I got a call from Charlie Bruce. Charlie Bruce says, hey, Scott, what are you doing? I haven't heard or talked to Charlie in almost 45 years. And so, well, what's going on? He says, I tracked you down. I said, what's happening? He says, well, my friend Frank Isaacs and I were thinking about doing this eagle survey, but we were also thinking about the herons. What's going on with the heron population on the Willamette River? He said, would you be interested in doing that study again? I said, sure, why not? Yeah. So I thought, what's it going to take? Well, now I don't have any volunteer pilots, but there's an organization called Lighthawk. I don't know if any of you guys know the organization, but they provide free of charge for conservation-related projects, pilots and aircraft. So I was able to get my project sponsored, and Lighthawk provided the aircraft. So we wound up flying, like I did in 1975, flew the river about 6 different times, photographing from the air, but this time we have GPS. So it was pretty easy. You were flying over a colony, I'm taking photographs, and on my camera I could basically push a button, and it'll give me latitude and longitude. So that made things a lot easier. So from there, we decided, okay, let's take a look at not just the heron population, because Charlie Bruce and Frank Isaacs, they were interested in looking at the bald eagle population, because in 1975, there were no eagles, none, because they were laying thin-shelled eggs in their nesting habitat here because they were down in Mexico feeding on fish and so forth that were contaminated with DDE and DDT pesticides. So it turns out in 1974, apparently, during the Nixon administration, I think it was Haldeman, this is something that Harry Fuller told me, I think it's true. Haldeman was a very conservative guy, but conservative in a sense that he really was an avid birder. And so he apparently went to Nixon and said, we've got to stop this contamination. So they passed legislation to ban pesticides. And then the eagle started recovering. So now we're doing a survey not just of herons, but of eagles. And so I thought, well, what are we going to do? So we got the aircraft, we did the flying. Charlie and Frank and quite a few volunteers, they did a lot of boat surveys, so they identified active eagle nests, and also occasionally they would spot some of the heron rookeries. And it turns out there's a lot of eagles. Frank basically told me that there's approximately an active nesting tree within 2 miles of the Willamette River, every 2 miles. So that explains why we have a dramatic drop. In 1975, I studied 31 rookeries, and that represented 722 active nests. In 2023, identified 16 rookeries for 292 active nests. So you can see that's a tremendous drop in population and number of rookeries. Let's see. So the use of drones. The use of drones, most of you know, there's a lot of crazy people out there with drones doing weird stuff. So I had an idea, if we could basically stop the disturbance by actively going into a rookery, we could really get some good data. If we could get a drone survey team together that's not yahoos, biologists with experience flying drones. So I ran across a guy named Elon Polsky, and Eli has a company called Rogue River Reconnaissance, and they specialize in doing different kind of surveys, eagle population surveys in Alaska, fishery studies, and so forth. And he agreed to give me a break and agreed to fly his drone system to photograph these colonies. And I was a little bit skeptical at first, and I said, well, before we do that, let's demonstrate to see how much disturbance these colonies are going to react to. So we selected a small colony, heron colony, in Agate Lake in Jackson County, outside of Medford. And he brought his survey crew in, and they surveyed that. And I was totally surprised. The drone didn't cause one bit of disturbance, and we got some great photographs. So based on that, we picked out 9 different rookeries from our survey to bring the drones in and get some specific data. And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see the results of that. And the data, you'll see from the video, the data is so clear. You can see eggs, you can see nest building, you can see incubation, you can see hatchlings, you can see nestlings. Can't see any fledglings because it was during May and they hadn't quite fledged yet. So that's the background, and there's very specialized cameras in this drone system. It's a Hasselblad camera system. I've got notes on if anybody's interested later, I could talk about more specifics. But it has very high resolution camera, and there's also an infrared camera system. So you can actually get a heat signature. You can actually identify if the nest was active by the heat signature. So you could actually see through vegetation, and you could know that there's an active bird sitting on that nest, which I thought was pretty amazing. So anyway, we proceeded then with this drone survey using this drone system, and we maintained 200 to 400 feet of vertical distance between the top of the trees where the nests were to the drone. And we never saw any sign of disturbance by the drones. The only disturbance we saw was we photographed this one rookery, and a bald eagle flew through it and really caused a ruckus. It wasn't the drone, it was the eagle. So we know that eagles are present. They're present in a lot of these areas, nest to the rookeries, and I'll present some of that data later. To get a little more specifics about the drone system, Eli and his colleague, his partner, are both certified FAA drone pilots, and they're also graduates in environmental science from Southern Oregon University. So we have our team, certified pilots, 3 biologists, and we were very careful as he was monitoring these colonies, and I was directing him word to shoot the nest and what kind of data we were after, and it came out, I thought, really well. So it's not that I'm just out there, trying to build up the greatness of drones, but we went to the Fish and Wildlife Service to try and get a permit. And in spite of the experience we had as biologists and as certified drone pilots, they could not see any way to give us a permit. So we just said, okay, fine. Luckily, none of the eagles are not endangered, neither are the herons, so we were able to just do the project based on professional judgment. And I guess you can judge for yourself today. I think it's a great tool, and I looked around, and apparently they're using drones and doing surveys of penguins in Antarctica. And if some of you are familiar with Mono Lake, some of the gull colonies on Mono Lake, which is where most of the western gulls, California gulls nest. They're using drones there to great success compared to using people in the past who do these surveys, which are highly disturbing. So I think there's a place for drones, and I'm sure that there's going to be some people who are going to say, no, you shouldn't use them. But I think with proper supervision and training and using it for scientific purposes, I think it's a legitimate tool. Let's see. I think now we should probably view the video, and after the video is going to be about 10 minutes. We'll take a look at the video, and then afterwards I'm going to present some data, and then after that we'll open it up to some questions. So with that, I guess we'll start the video and go from there. Let's see if I can get this out here.
Scott, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm not getting any sound anyway. Just wanted to let you know that.
This is a map of the 210-mile rookery study area that begins at the Sauter Island Rookery in the north and ends in the south at the MRT Rookery. The map indicates 16 active and 2 inactive rookeries, and the stars indicate the 6 colonies that are featured in this video. 49 years ago, a similar survey of Great Blue Heron rookeries along the Willamette River documented 722 active nests. The 722 active nests were compared to the current nest survey of 292 nests, which represents a 60% decline. Bald eagle populations along the river have increased dramatically, according to a recent unpublished survey report by Frank Isaacs. Analysis of that data indicates active bald eagle nests are located within 1/4 mile of 10 of the 16 active rookeries. Predation by the eagles, as well as other raptors, had likely impacted the heron population. Page 23 of the Willamette River Basin Atlas shows the Harrisburg Reach. It illustrates that in 1995, quote, the total area of the channels and islands is less than 1/5 the comparable area in 1850, end quote. Significant losses of floodplain riparian and woodland habitat, as well as invasive plants, climate change, agricultural practices, gravel mining, and other developments have impacted the nesting and feeding habitat of the herons and contributed to the decline of the population.
Okay. Now I'd like to just share some of the data with you guys. The first one here is just, this is a copy of the study that we did in 1975 that was published in the National Audubon Research Bulletin. It pretty much just describes what I tried to tell you in the beginning, just the methodologies and so forth. I think I'll just flip to, well, there's a pretty decent shot. And this is very typical of what we saw in 1975. You can just see a lot of the riparian zone through here. These gallery forests. What's really changed a lot since 1975 is when we were flying this, and I also looked at this in Google Earth, so much of that habitat has been lost. And I don't have any exact data, but just my comfort zone of the way it felt and the way it looked in 1975 compared to now. There's a lot less habitat, a lot more gravel mining, a lot more development. So coupled with eagles coming back, their populations coming back, which is wonderful, but there's also predation issues, so all these issues are definitely contributing to that decline. This is a table that basically summarizes all of the rookeries, starting in East Island, which is near Ross Island in Portland, if any of you folks are familiar with that. And then extending south through Candiani Island, Windsor Island, Independence Bend. I think here in Salem, we've got, let's see, Luckymute, Jackson. I think there was a Minto Island, but the Minto Island, oh, there it is, Minto Island in 1975. Some of you are probably familiar with that. There was a small colony there. But in this recent survey, that colony has been abandoned. Minto Island? Or just that rookery? I see. Okay. Well, the ivy will kill the trees. We know that. Yeah. Um, anyway, if anybody is interested, you can check these at the bottom. Let's see if I can find it. The Lauren, what do you call those? The QR codes. Well, anyway, okay, right. They'll be at the end, so we can go to another slide. Um, let's see. I'm trying to find the one table that has current information. Let's see. Find it here. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Got it. Oh, let's see. Do I have to click out of this? Okay. I see. Here we go. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, this is just a spreadsheet that shows the upper part of this is looking at the different rookeries that were surveyed with a drone. And again, there were 9 that were looked at. 3 of the rookeries that were surveyed by the drone, we didn't have good images. The surprise was what we saw in Sauvie Island. I think we saw that one previously in the rookery at Snaggy Bend. Did anybody notice that great egret was in that picture? So that's interesting because in 1975, there were no great egrets in Oregon that I know of. They were all in California. And so now they're moving north, and this is a pretty substantial colony. There's 62 active nests in Sauvie Island, mixed in with 22 great blue heron nests. That's an interesting factoid. What else can I tell you here? There are just a lot of data, but if you wanted to, it's so small to read. Well, here you can see it. There we go. Turn around and look at this. Mine is so small you can't read it. Luckily, it's blown up. So now you can get an idea. This is the kind of data that we're able to glean from this. So once we had these images, we could go through there step by step, and we could count how many eggs, we could count how many nestlings, we could count how many hatchlings, and we couldn't do it for the whole rookery, but we'd get a good sample size of what was going on in that rookery. So you can see we had 8 herons in incubation position. That's in the Delta Ponds. That's down by Eugene. Some information here is 2 herons that had 4 eggs each, 4 herons incubating. So you get an idea of the different kinds of activity that you're able to document. And you can't do that from the ground. You know, you're looking up with your binoculars, so you're not really seeing live activity. You know, you can tell they're active because you can go out of the colonies. If you're going on the ground, you can see eggshells on the ground. And maybe later in the progression of nesting success, you can hear the young. They have a certain kind of clatter that they're making when they're in the nesting activity. So we have not taken this data yet and published it. So right now, Charlie, if you're listening, and Frank, if you're listening, we're going to be putting this data together and it will be published. We're not sure where, but it'll be available. Hopefully we'll get it done before this summer. And so stay tuned. If we get this published, we'll be sure and let you guys know where it can be found. But it'll summarize a lot of the results and talk about what are some of the reasons why we're seeing this decline in the heron population. There's, you can speculate, but you could see from the photos. Well, I should ask you, did you see anything that looked obvious as far as disturbance from the drones? Anybody? No. What? Did you see anything? Well, no, I'm talking about the actual, see the drones are up here and the colony is down here, but yeah. In one of the videos, you could kind of see a rotor blade. Yeah, but that's not disturbing. I was looking for disturbance of the herons themselves, not the aircraft. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Hall's Ferry, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I think there were just very few in there. I think there were 2 nests. So very small. Yeah. Of the and I'll get to the next slide after this, but of the 31 colonies in 1975, only 4 were still active today. And there's a lot of variables. So you can't say exactly why that happens, but just because of the eagles and because of habitat loss and the combination, they're definitely losing ground. Yep. The question was any problems with poisoning voles and mice and rodents and so forth? Not that I know of. Yeah. It wasn't like they were having the thin-shelled egg problems where they were feeding on contaminated fish. I'm sure they would, yeah. And I haven't seen any documentation about that. Yes. Well, yeah, the question is, the impact of great egrets in terms of taking away some of the food supplies for the herons. I'm sure it has some impact, but I don't know to what extent. I mean, that's the only colony I know of in Oregon, is that colony. Yeah, that's true. Any correlation between bird and fish populations? It's a question for sure, but it was beyond the scope of what we're looking at right now. So I really don't know the answer to that. Yes, but the herons and egrets both, they feed a lot on just other things besides fish. A lot of rodents, a lot of amphibians. Um, yeah, insects. They're pretty variable in their diets. Yeah. I think I'm gonna move on to maybe the next slide. This is a this is a table that Frank Isaacs put together, and you could see on the left column you'll see the name of the rookery. Next column is the number of Great Blue Heron active nests. Next column is the number of bald eagle nest trees that were in close proximity to the colonies. And you could see over here in the final column here on the right, how many of the colonies that were abandoned since 1975. And you take a look at how many bald eagle nest trees are associated with those abandoned colonies. So you get an idea of, that there's an impact. And again, we're looking for correlations, but we don't really have enough data to really say something substantially other than there is definitely an impact, there's definitely a decline, and we'll be taking a look at some of the variables that would cause that. Well, that's true, and I have looked at it. I've looked at the area of photographs. I've looked at Google Earth. All right, that better? I don't know if that answered your question or not. That's correct. Yeah. No, they would not show up in it. But I could tell you that um, 4 of them showed up in 2023, and so there were 12 that were brand new in 2023. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay. Well, I've enjoyed my talk here. I appreciated the hospitality and being able to thank you personally for funding this research back in 1975. I don't know if you guys were aware that you did that, but you did. And it was very helpful, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah. Oh, let's see. Oh, the QR codes. Oh, thank you, Lauren.
Do you all know how to use these? You can take your phone, hold it up with your camera on, and the website will show up. Those will give you links. I'll leave them up there for you.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Well, thank you. It gives you a different idea. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad I didn't climb any trees because that was scary. I mean, I remember being up 50 feet in the air when a windstorm came and the tree was going 30 feet from one side to the other. I just grabbed and held onto the branches. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
Yeah, you're welcome.